Welcome back to another episode of Just
Just
a
a
Squirrel
squirrel
Looking
looking
for a
for
Nut,
a nut,
trying to
trying to
get
get
out of
out of
this
this
rut.
rut.
Not bad. Not bad.
Sounds
Hey,
really good,
much better
especially.
than Berman and I did it last week.
And Bodie wasn't here to add an additional wrench into the oil, but
No.
that's okay. We miss them both. And I want to just start by saying a couple of things here. First of all, Jessica and Melody, it is good to see you again. Thank you for coming to the show. I love both of y'all to pieces, and it is always a better day in life when the two of you are in the room. That's number one. Number two, I want to talking about Bodie, just give a warm expression of gratitude to Bodie, to everyone else, Caleb, Pearson, Joe Bogdan, all of our other friends who are in the military, and all of those that have come before them in honor of today, which is Veterans Day here in the United States. The sacrifices that people have made for so many things that we take for granted in the country today, including the right to live lives that are epic, is never going to go as long as I'm a part of the show, and I'm sure the same can be said for you, Oleg, unacknowledged or unappreciated.
Yeah.
And
No,
Melody, I
I
see
feel
your hearts.
strongly
Thank
about
you.
I feel strongly about all of them. I think there's something to be said. And we've had many of them like that. Many conversations where we'll be able to express their appreciate or our appreciation for them. So
Exactly.
I appreciate you, Scott, for
I
appreciating that.
appreciate you too, and I appreciate DJ Durant. And I might have mispronounced your last name. Is it Durant or Durante, DJ? I just know you as DJ. You're DJ to me, sort of like Madonna. I don't know if it's Saccone or Saccone is how you pronounce her last name. She's Madonna. So, in any event, you are in your own way like a Madonna to us, DJ. Welcome to the show. Now, I'm going to move on to the direct topic, if you don't mind, Oleg. You can slap me around if you disagree. But I got to say, your arms have got to be pretty long if you're going to be slapping me all the way from Europe, which is where you are right now. Speaking of Europe, let's talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, ancient Greece. There was a word that the ancient Greeks had to describe a very peculiar state of being. And that word was kleos, spelled Kleos. Kleos meant glory or renown or fame. As we mentioned in the write-up for this, it was the first part of the name Cleopatra. It also, though, was more than just abject fame or fame without any attachment to anything. For instance, famous gladiators later in the Roman era might have been famous, but they didn't necessarily have Kleos attached to them. In order to be inured with Kleos, the glory or the fame that you had needed to be such that you could be sung about in epic poetry. And the word Kleos, by the way, is the root of the ultimate epic hero in all of Greek and Roman mythology, Heracles, also known as Hercules by the Romans. Heracles suffered torture at the hands of the goddess of timing, Hera. And those tortures are what enabled him to have the struggles that he fought against in order to live a life that ultimately gave him immortality in the form of Kleos, a glory that people sing about to this very day. Heracleos means, or is the root of the word Heracles. The reason I talk about all of this is because back in those days, not everyone had the opportunity to live a life that was anything that someone could approach singing about in an epic poetry, in an epic poem. You might have been a slave and been toiling your whole life away in the mines of Numidia. You might have just been a freeman or a peasant who lived out on a farm somewhere or owned a little restaurant somewhere and no one cared about you. Or you might have been a soldier that basically joined the army out of conscription and died anonymously in a field somewhere. You might have been a subject that was slaughtered when you were a child when the Romans came and took over your town, or the Greeks for that matter. Only a very small number of people could live a life that enabled them to have epic songs sung about them. But that's not the truth today. We live in a free society now. We live in a society where there's social mobility, where
Hmm.
you have options if you choose to take them, where women, men, people of all different backgrounds, there may be more or less degrees of obstacles, but if you have the will, the savvy, the drive, the ability to get out there and seek help, you can live a life that to the people way back when would have been worth singing about for ages. And
Yeah.
so, my question today to you, Oleg, is do you want a life that is epic? I turn this over to you because you are
Hmm.
living your own sort of epic right now. Was
Yeah.
living a life that was epic part of the consideration that you had when you went on your current journey that I view as pretty damn heroic? And I'd like to also hear anything from Gabe. Thank you for joining the show. DJ, Melody, Jessica, about any thoughts you have about the choices you might make or have made around your own life as being the subject of a potentially epic poem someday.
So I think for me, and I appreciate you sharing that, Scott, because it definitely sparked some thoughts within my head about the journey that I've taken in the last month, maybe a little bit over a month. And that's for those that are not aware, I just started this journey of traveling to some of the different countries that I've been wanting to go for quite some time. And I guess the best way that I could answer that is, am I living an epic life right now? I would say yes and no. And for me, I don't really look at this as an epic life to be said by any means, but more so just a life that I chose from however long ago. I know that there were points of my life where I did not choose to go on this journey because of the limitations that I had set for myself, the fears that I constantly encountered. And I shared this with you as well as some of the other people that I'm sure are connected to this particular show as well. And that's to the outside world, people have perceived me as the most brave, courageous X, Y, and Z individual that they might have encountered. But on the reality, I'm also human. And on the inside, I experience similar thoughts that I think many other people do. Traveling around the world, I faced a lot of fears before actually embarking upon this journey. I felt that there were times where I didn't have enough money, where I had too many responsibilities at home, where I didn't have enough time, all the other things that I'm sure you can relate to, Scott, before you went on your travel with
Yeah.
David. And so, what I started to realize ultimately was that I had a choice. I could either live with these fears and limitations, and then later on have them transform into profound regrets about the things that I could have done but did not choose to do, or I could take a chance. I could take a chance and I could still face the challenges and obstacles that I would have in a day to day, even living in Austin or in Ann Arbor or whatever it is. And so for me, it really was, I guess you could say, a simple and a complex decision at the same time. And that's, I just chose to go for it. I chose to go for it. And what I realized was that by going for it, not only did I create opportunities for myself where I've been able to meet all of these people on the journey and actually experience a whole new level of confidence and courage than I experienced previously. But I think I've also simultaneously might have created a path for other people to understand that it's also possible for them to experience this type of life. It's also possible for them to travel the world in whatever means that they do. And so I think, am I living an epic life? Yes, I think so, but it's only because that's the life that I'm choosing, and I'm really happy with it. I've learned that even through this life and everything that I'm doing to this point, it's in complete alignment with what I've been wanting to do. And you were the last person that saw me before I left.
Yes.
I stayed with
Mel,
you in New York, and that was, it was a beautiful thing because it helped me see a couple of different things. But you, Scott, you've been a pretty big part of my journey for the past year and a half. And the last 3 days before I left, a seeing you in person is a completely different experience than seeing you through the screen for a year and a half. But also, it helped me realize that um, all of these things are possible, and I think there's something to be said about the power of influence that other people have. And that's when I think sometimes when I meet people and I know that they're they truly have your back no matter what, and you are one of those people. And I haven't had a chance to know David for that long, but just for the 3 days that I've known him, like I know for a fact that not even if anything goes wrong, but at any given moment, I can pick up the phone and call you guys and feel heard and feel appreciated,
Yeah,
and
and have a
it's
home.
something to be said about that.
Yeah.
And just yeah.
First of all, Melody, I saw the remark that you made, and I want you to hold on to that. And we're going to get to it in a minute. I just want to have a brief digression here. I'm actually fighting back tears.
Hmm.
As Oleg, it's hard to describe the role that you have had in my life in the past. Actually, it's been more like a year and 9 months. The journey that we've gone on together, including this show, it's had such an influence on me. And I do think that it was fitting and beautiful that we were the last people that we saw before you went
Hmm.
on this journey. Because in a way, if this part of your epic has in any way mirrored mine, you've been of singular importance in this part of the journey in
Hmm.
my life, and that it would be you and us, and you being in my house during this last leg before you went, to me was somehow profoundly fitting.
Hmm.
And so, thank you for sharing that and understand how mutual it is. Now, Gabe and Melody both have things that they want to say. I'm going to talk about Melody's first.
Hmm.
Melody, you said that the main way your life has been epic has been in healing generational wounds and creating a mission of helping others to heal as well. And that is a very interesting way of framing an epic journey to me. Traditionally, the epics that people have sung around or sung about and talk about have been very action oriented. They've struggled against the odds. They've fought something. There's been a triumph, a moment of victory over something that has led to an outcome that brings a very traditional, I would almost say, martial sense of glory into the room. And that's the story of Heracles. But let's talk for a minute about another Greek hero,
Hmm.
Asclepius. Asclepius was the
I gotta catch
world's.
up on the Greek mythology here.
Well, that's why I'm here for. Asclepius was the first doctor. He invented the art of medicine. And although inventing something is not necessarily equated in the cultural mind today with an act of epic heroism, it's no coincidence that Asclepius was worshipped in the same cult like fashion in ancient Greece as were the greater heroes like Heracles.
Mm.
Why do I take it all back to this? Because what Melody has done is, in a way, redefined what an epic life can be outside of this traditional, almost Hollywood action figure story arc into one involving multiple generations, reaching back into wounds and healing, taking a medicinal approach to how she moves her life and the energy that she's bringing out into the universe forward. And I think that that's significant because it can be easy to say, oh, was his or her life full of action and adventure? That's what
Hmm.
we remember people for. Did they conquer something? Were they like Jeff Bezos conquering industry? Or were they like George W. Bush? Were they conquering countries like Iraq?
Hmm.
Melody is redefining epic to say, did I heal wounds? Was I in
Hmm.
the battlefield taking out a sponge and dipping it in water and salving something?
Well, do you also think that, so one of the things that I've recently have found within my own life as far as the realization goes is I was listening to a book called Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty. And one of the things that he spoke about in that book is this concept of, and I can't say it only happens in US. I think it happens in many parts of the world, but it's this concept of wanting to make things big. So when it comes to purpose, when it comes to some of these other things that we may strive for in life, and what I started to realize is, even as we're having this conversation about what it means to live an epic life, I wonder, is it possible for an individual to live an epic life through the simple gestures of life? So, someone who may not choose to pursue the purpose similar to Gandhi, MLK, and or some of many other people throughout life that we put on, the hierarchy as far as
Yeah.
this is what it means to be able to achieve X, Y, and Z as far as change goes and whatever else. So I wonder, to what degree is an epic life possible for someone who may not strive for some of these other aspirations that people have been able to achieve throughout history?
Gabe's remark hints at that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he doesn't address it directly, and he typed it in before you actually made that statement, but I feel like it sort of captures that spirit. Actually, I feel Gabe is living an epic life. And why do I feel that Gabe is living an epic life? Because he's choosing to make himself, and being perceived rightfully so, as a credible leader in an emerging field. That is
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn Live, an emerging field that is growing rapidly. And he's doing that in a way that's truly supporting those of us in the community. So I do want to give a second to say thank you for that, as always, Gabe. That being said, he doesn't say that about himself. He talks more
Mm-hmm.
about the ebbs and flows of life and enjoying the journey of life itself. And to me, that is perhaps going to what you're talking about. Is your life epic? One thing that I, though, want to push back to you on about that, and it's
Mm-hmm.
part of why this question bubbled into my mind as a potential topic for us, which is, actually, can you live a life? And I'm not going to talk about Gabe in
Mm-hmm.
particular, because, like I said, I actually think Gabe is understating his impact in the world with that remark. But, and I know that he wasn't even, his remark was neutral one way or the other. But let's talk about someone whose life is, at least arguably, not involving anything except the ebbs and flows of the mundane.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say your sole and only goal in life is to get up, go to work, catch the latest episode of Big Bang Theory or the Squid Game or whatever it is you might be watching, go to bed, get up again, have beers with your friends on the weekend, catch a game or two, and then start it all over again. And then one day
Mm-hmm.
retire. Can you say you've lived an epic life if that's the case? You have, as Gabe suggested, gone with the ebb and flow of life. But have you lived it in a way that's epic? Is it a life that someone would have Cleos about with regards to you? In other words, that they would sing about later.
Mm, maybe at a bar, but but I think there's also another part of that story, and that's, I think it kind of going back to maybe the remark you had made or I have made prior to this, and that's, who's to say that epic has to come in this um, grand gesture? Because I guess in that case, compared to my definition of what it means to live an epic life or have a sense of purpose or meaning, or whatever, yes, it may not check those boxes, but at the same time, what if that's just the role that the person chose to accept in their lives, and to them that means it's an epic form of living? And I guess it leads to maybe another question within the question, and that is, can an individual, so does is epic defined by, a larger scope of people, or can epic be defined by the solely the individual at hand? Can one individual define what it means epic to be to them, or in order for it to be epic and to have a song about it, do you need to have a larger pool of people?
If your life is boring to
Right,
you or
right,
to others, I'll push back and say you haven't lived an epic life.
right.
Well, let's actually, I take that back.
But what if
Th-
you do enjoy that beer? What if you do enjoy that lifestyle?
That's your
Drinking
life.
a
That doesn't
beer,
mean it's
going to a
epic.
Knicks game on Saturday and catching the Jets game on Sunday, and then you start it all over Monday morning. To one, it might be perceived as boring. To one, it might be perceived as just a routine that the other one follows from one week to another. But at the same time, it's also hard to kind of figure out like the reason why the person might do it. So I'll give you an example. When I was living in Ann Arbor for 10 to 12 years, however long it was prior to Austin, I loved going to Michigan football games. I mean, I'm a huge Michigan football fan. So every single Saturday, not every single Saturday, but close enough, I would go to the games. And to some people, it could have been the most boring thing that I was doing, especially people that did not like football. But to me, it was a form of living an epic life because I get to experience something that I truly love on a weekly basis.
If if your life is satisfying, is that
Mhm.
enough to make it epic?
That's
I'm
that's a good question.
I'm arguing that there's a difference between living a life that is mundane and
Mhm.
satisfying and one that's epic.
Mhm.
Because to me, epic somehow does imply at least striving to live at that higher level. Melody, interestingly enough, did not say, I'm looking to heal my own wounds. And that's the
Mhm.
goal of my life. She said she was looking at dealing with generational hurts
Mhm.
and helping others. So she's talking about multiple layers of impact there, erasing a whole history. That to me is an epic ambition, let alone an epic act. As opposed to Melody saying, I wanted to, and even if your damage is severe enough, I would argue that that itself, that healing process could be epic. But let's say you just, you and no, we can never capture anyone's entire life in a few
Mhm.
sentences, so I understand, I know the limitations about what I'm about to say.
Mhm.
Don't, I'm going to ask anyone to not argue with me on the rhetoric but more argue with me about the underlying substance, which is, let's say you live a life, you were born into upper middle class parent, a family of upper middle class means, you were in whatever privileged caste of your society that your society has, and you go to school, you get good grades because you're reasonably bright and you're reasonably attractive, so you get along well with people. You don't have any illnesses, you don't have any major crises or catastrophes. You go to college, you get a great job right out of that, and because you fit into culture and you don't have a lot of drama or eccentricity, you end up escalating up in the corporate ladder, and then eventually you hit, maybe mid or upper mid level of management, and you do that for the rest of your life, and then you retire,
Mhm.
and your life is mostly centered around dealing with your family and the things that are small that you enjoy. Okay, you've lived a life that you may personally find satisfying, but is that really epic? And if it's not epic, is that okay? Because I'm going to argue
Mhm.
that actually we all have an obligation to live a life that's epic. We all have an obligation to be Gabe, Melody, DJ, to the extent that we can.
But you could also, I think, make an argument the fact that because we are all different, so we don't all see the same thing in the same exact way. And what I mean with that point is, for example, you and I, Scott, as well as Gabe and DJ and um, Melody. I don't know Melody to that degree, but having had conversations with the others and Jessica, I know that one of the things that's common in denominator amongst all of us is we invite risk into our lives. So what I mean by that is that we take some of these decisions that might be perceived as huge risks in their lives and we choose to act upon them. So then for me, then the question becomes, okay, are we defining this concept of what it means to be epic based on a structure where we are going beyond our own limitations. Is that what we're subscribing to as far as an epic definition? For example, are you and I living an epic life because we chose to go into the world and face whatever the odds and obstacles that we had to face in order to become public speakers, in order to start a podcast from scratch, in knowing that there were thousands of other podcasts before, and still we chose to be 1001? Does that define an epic life because we're able to take a risk and go beyond our limitation, which might have been don't do it, what's the point, you have nothing to share, blah blah blah. So and then it just, there's another question within that, and that's, I does everyone have that capacity? Does everyone have the capacity to take the risk and go beyond their limitation? Or are there individuals in this world, in order to create a balance and in order to create kind of the yin and the yang, exist with that mindset that they hold back on certain risks? And is there value in having people like that in the world in order to help us create perspective, in order for us to create some contrast between the two realities?
Melody has a fairly lengthy but interesting quote that's worth putting up. And then the remark that she has immediately after the quote seems to go as to her opinion around this. I love it when you agree with me, Melody. Just saying. That being said, and I want to give anyone that's watching or listening a chance to absorb Melody's quote here. It's actually very interesting. So, what I will say in response to what you say
Mm-hmm.
is, if I were to accept what you just said is true,
Mm-hmm.
I would give up hope.
Mm-hmm.
Because how I'm interpreting what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying that this is what you mean, but
Mm-hmm.
this is how I'm choosing to take it, is that the majority of people are just a bunch of sheep. A few people are designed to lead them. So let the leaders lead, let the sheep just eat their grass.
So you're saying everyone has the capacity to take risk in life?
In the society that we're living in now. Actually, it's a controversial statement to say,
Mm-hmm.
but even in some of the more repressive societies, the choices that they had may have been more constrained,
Mm-hmm.
but they did have choice. In fact, that's what Toni Morrison's novel Beloved is about. The slave in there, Setha, the name of the main character,
Mm-hmm.
has a choice about what to do with her daughter's lives, who or her baby daughter, who is a slave, and so she slits its throat. Now, of course, the moral dilemma in that is that who was even this slave Setha to make this decision about her daughter?
Mm-hmm.
But be that as it may, even in slavery, this woman had a choice about her actions. And in fact, slave revolts, both in the Roman Empire and other slave holding societies, as well as in the United States, not to mention slaves killed themselves or hung themselves, indicate that even in that very limited spectrum, there was opportunity for choice, even if that choice was to end it all for yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's I'm processing this. It's interesting, um, but I'm still. I guess what I'm. I do share your belief that I do believe that everyone has a choice as far as they can choose to go one way or another. But the one thing that I don't fully understand, and maybe this is just due to my lack of experience or perspective, is I don't believe everyone manages risks nor understand risks the same exact way. That's where I think it changes the whole definition of what it means to live an epic life. Because for me, choosing to book a one-way ticket from JFK to Lisbon and not know when the return flight's going to be, that's a risk I was willing to take. For you, similar thing. I don't know what was your first flight. What did you fly into first when you were traveling?
Overseas to England to
Yeah.
London.
Okay, to London. So probably a similar thing. Like I don't think you guys booked the return flight, right?
I did, but
Anyway, so you get the
who knows
point.
what
Like,
was going to happen, right? I mean, for all I know,
right?
it could have crashed into the ocean.
But that's the point. Is I'm realizing that this concept of epic. I mean, yes, we can define it for people, but at the same time, because everyone has a different uh, perspective, I don't know if it's fair to say that one person is living an epic life and the other one's not. And to me, yes, I could sit here and I could say, okay, sitting on the couch and eating potato chips all day, for me, that is not an epic life. But that's just because I choose to accept that reality. So I guess, in my opinion, what contributes to an epic life is someone who is willing to take the risk. And what I mean by that risk is a risk that is beyond their limitations. So my limitation might be, don't travel abroad, the world is a scary place. And then I choose to do it. I choose to take that action. I choose to take that leap of faith and go into the unknown and have no idea what's going to happen. That is a version of an epic life. But I think what I personally find sometimes is there's also, and I don't know if you can relate to this, Scott or Melody or anyone else, but in starting different things, for example, some of the people that I spoke with today who are wanting to start podcasts, right? To start off a podcast, you're starting from ground zero.
Hmm.
And in releasing your first episode to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world seeing that you only have one episode, that may not seem like an epic journey that you're embarking on. But from the other end of that, it could be an epic journey because it's more than you have ever done before. You might not have felt comfortable publishing that article. So to you, that was a huge step on an epic adventure. But to someone else who's an outsider, it's just one thing. It's one article among billions of other articles, one podcast episode among thousands, if not millions, of other podcast episodes. So that's where I think it gets a little tricky as far as how does one define what it means to live an epic life, because the journey could be viewed so differently depending on who's looking at it.
Well, then, if the living of an epic life is
Mm-hmm.
truly that subjective,
Mm-hmm.
are you saying that everyone's living an epic life? Melody says everyone has a purpose, and that's an important remark because for
Mm-hmm.
anything to be epic, there presumably is some sense of purpose behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Random chaos is generally agreed upon. It's not particularly epic
Mm-hmm.
in of itself. You might be fighting chaos, and that's epic, but just chaos, purposelessness,
Mm-hmm.
meaninglessness is generally not viewed as something epic or aspirational in any sort of way. And if everyone's life is epic because we're measuring what's epic or not based on that person's capacity, well,
Mm-hmm.
then what is is epic having any meaning? Is that just a wasted word that we have in our vocabulary for no particular reason? Because we've got nothing better to say, so we just utter the word epic every now and then. Because I got a problem with that.
But so I don't think it's a wasted word. I think the word does have meaning. But I guess what I'm saying is that the word doesn't only have one meaning. So is everyone living an epic life? I have no effing idea. Maybe, maybe not. I can only speak from my perspective. In going back to Melody's point, everyone has a purpose. I believe everyone and everything has a purpose. I believe what you just described, Scott, as far as there are certain things that quote unquote don't have meaning, also contain meaning within it. That the random acts of whatever kindness or the random people I bump into somehow play into it, but that's only because of the choices that I choose to make from it. So I could bump into someone at a grocery store and think, okay, whatever, that was just a random person, or I can bump into them and think of X, Y, and Z circumstance that all of a sudden makes sense from some previous events. So I guess what I'm saying with that to complicate this subject even more is I don't know if it's fair to say that there is one definition of what it means to be epic, and that's solely because you and we approach life through a slightly different lens. I mean, we I can't speak for you, and I you can speak for yourself, but for me, and you even said this to me one time, it might have been during the time when I was staying at your place. You said you like a challenge. I love a challenge. I
That's why I like
love the
arguing with you.
uncertainty. I love the unknown. I love putting myself in situations where I know I have to take a risk on X, Y, and Z in order to experience the reality that I strive for. Is everyone in that boat? Absolutely not. But does that make their life any less quote unquote epic, meaningful, purposeful? I don't know. I guess according to my definition of purpose, yes. But according to someone else's definition of what it means to live a purposeful life, no. There are some people who are perfectly fine. Like, I'll give you another example. Having walked through Portugal from Lisbon to Spain, what I've realized is that there are some people, not some people, many people who choose to live what could be argued as ordinary lives. They have a farm, they have some animals, they have one supermarket at a particular village that they go to, and from there they choose to go about their day to day. They spend time with their neighbors, their family, and that's it. That's their day from sunrise to sunset. And meanwhile, I'm looking at their lives and I'm thinking to myself, is that it? Is that an epic life? But I'm also, in thinking about that, I'm noticing myself in judgment, and that is, I've lived in a different culture. I've lived in a culture of US where if you don't make it big, in many of the instances, you're not worthwhile, you're not worth listening to. And so I just look at a lot of these situations, and I think that's the perspective I've been able to gain through these experiences, is that maybe those people who live those lives still have a purpose. Maybe their purpose is to show me what it's like to live another life. Maybe their purpose of holding a door for someone else who's walking into that supermarket does serve a purpose. Going back to Melody's point, everyone has a purpose. It
Everyone
just
has
varies, you know?
everyone has a purpose, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing anything to achieve it. And that is embedded indirectly in Melody's most recent comment.
Yeah.
Right? She's saying that if they have an impact on the lives of others, and I'm embedding here a positive impact, then
But how do you define that though? Like, how do you define impact? Like, is me holding the door for you when you walk into your apartment impact? Is me picking up your tissue after you drop it on the floor? Is that impact? Therefore, is that cannot be considered an epic form of living because I'm choosing to care for someone else, therefore impact their own existence?
it's a good question. It might be because the one could argue, and I might argue this, that
Yeah.
the act of being there and positively impacting others takes work, and it's hard, and it always involves struggle, even if it's a minor one. Someone litters in front of you, so you stop what you're doing and you pick it up and you put that piece of paper they've just thrown under the ground into the trash. That takes a little bit of work. It may not be an epic act in of itself, but it could be part of an epic way of living. The impact could be that is, that piece of litter might have been the one straw that broke a camel's back of some right pollution sensitive something somewhere. We don't
What if
know.
it's a mask? What if it's a mask that's in New York City during COVID-19 age and you don't pick it up?
Yeah, that's a good question.
But
Well,
that's
then
another
we'll
like
have a whole other discussion about apocalyptic scenarios that could flow from that. But I say that because uh, I do want to talk a little bit, if we can, about the
Mhm.
converse. Let's not talk for a second about people that are just living quote unquote ordinary lives like the farmers. I would say they are actually serving a purpose if they are farming because they're providing food or some other
Yeah.
thing that society needs in order to function. And is it epic or not? Well, I think few people would argue in our modern culture that dealing with animals and all of the stuff that comes with them is not epic in its own way. But feel free to disagree with me, anyone. Let's talk about those that impact people, but in a villainous way. Let's say you're someone who strives to make an impact, but it is very horrible. Let's say you're Pol Pot, or Stalin, or Hitler, or a serial killer on a more localized level.
Yeah.
Right? Like, are you living a life that's epic there if you're the villain of the epic? In fact,
That's a good
can
question.
you be a villain and live a life that's epic?
So I would say, personally speaking, I would argue that you can't live an epic life, but that's only because I'm choosing to associate positive with the word epic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not choosing to associate a negative with the word epic. I think the other thing that's interesting is when thinking about epic, the other word that comes to mind is big, some sort of
Mm-hmm.
grand gesture. Which I mean, if you so when I was younger, 23, 24 years old, the things that were considered epic back then were going on these exotic trips to Thailand and Africa and
That's still pretty
safaris and
epic
yeah,
to
things like
me.
that, right? But at the same time, it puts it in perspective as far as why are those the things that are considered to be epic? Is it because it's experiences that not everyone is able to experience, nor has the capacity to experience?
Yeah, that's part of what makes something epic, I would say.
That's part of it. But then the other thing is, going back to your question of some of these other role models and why I don't consider them epic is because I think I associate positive with this concept of being epic. But at the same time, someone who, let's say, follows any of those individuals or aligns with that methodology, would they consider those acts to be epic because they align with their own way of living and thinking? So I guess at the end of the day, do you consider something epic because you are able to relate to it directly?
I
Therefore, if you aspire for it, is that the thing?
yeah.
Is that the reason why it becomes epic for you?
Well, that's an interesting question. To me, I would probably have to admit that the answer would be yes. I would view it aspirationally, or
Yeah.
living a life in which I achieved something that I viewed aspirationally. Like, let's say I started a company tomorrow, and within 5 years, I had Jeff Bezos's wealth, and was building a rocket and flying to outer space just because I had nothing better to do but sew together a blue satin suit and buy an ugly cowboy hat and go up into the sky. Right.
I hope
Couldn't do it.
Amazon
Right.
doesn't shut us down.
Right. We'll just say, yeah, right.
I
This
hope
might be the end of
Amazon
our
doesn't shut
careers.
us
Oops.
down.
So, okay, let's just say I took melodies. I decided to take melodies with all my money, melodies approach to epic living to an extreme, and literally like spent all my money and cured cancer. That I would have viewed as something that I wanted to do that was big, over the top, people would talk about for a long time, and was grand and positive. Now, aspirationally,
Hmm.
the problem I have with that as a term qualifying anything in a positive way is that to throw your own mindset right back at you, Oleg,
Yeah.
not everyone views the same things aspirationally. And let's talk
Correct.
about extremes, right? Serial killers,
Oh yeah.
Hitler,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
right? Like Pol
Different
Pot, they
aspirations. Yeah.
wanted to be tyrants and they got it. And I would not view that aspirationally. I certainly wouldn't view the end of their stories as aspirational. It's Hitler committing suicide and leaving his entire country in ruins. But uh, some people do view tyranny, oppression, domination of others. I knew someone who worked for a certain very infamous female landlord here in New York City. And according to him, this extraordinarily wealthy person who lived in a penthouse, and anyone who's from New York who hears this will know who I'm talking about. I won't say this individual's name, and that she has passed on. But this person, for instance, loved to terrorize her staff. She allegedly defecated in her beds, then would call the maids to come and clean it up and laugh and just have a grand old time watching their faces contort and their hands, right, like be delicate as they had to clean up literally her garbage that she left on bed sheets and then and scrub that shit and make sure that it was all perfect again. That was something, that was a behavior pattern that she aspired to. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe she viewed her life as epic. I have gotten to such a place in my life that I can literally do something so horrible in my bed and sit there in my gowns and in my diamonds and watch some poor person come in who can't afford to do another job, scrub up after me and laugh and have a ball. That's epic living.
Yes, that's a lot to process. So yes, to me, that based on my definition, that would not be an epic form of living. But once again, that's because I choose to assign positive connotation with it, and I think uplifting others to me is something that is in alignment with epic living. What I find interesting within what you just said is that yes, you and I may not draw, or we may not aspire to be some of these other people throughout history, like Hitler or serial killers or bank robbers or whoever it might be. And I'm not by any means saying that those actions are okay according to my way of living. But what I am finding interesting with all of that is that almost every single one of us has their own aspirations, and they're all probably different than the person next to them. So then I guess the question becomes is in that way, and I can somewhat see the point that you were making at the beginning of this, and that's, well, if everyone's life is epic, then what's even the point of saying the word to begin with? What is the point of trying to differentiate that this is, what's the point of you using these terms to begin with,
Totally. If
right?
everyone in the world is blonde, why am I buying a wig? Tell me.
But it's true, and I think that's the beauty of these conversations is that they start with one subject or question, and then they lead to another, and sometimes they can lead to a deeper discovery. But ultimately, what I have learned through these conversations is that at the end of the day, there is no one size fits all. There is no one definition for any of it. And I think the same applies to this concept of epic life. I mean, to you, based on the resources that you have at hand right now, you could say that you're living an epic life. Like, do you think you're living an epic life right now?
I'm trying to.
Okay. And to someone else who, let's say, might have less or more resources, they could also say they're living an epic life.
Yeah.
But that's so I guess at the end of the day, does that have to do with you choosing to take action, you choosing to take risks on the future that may or may not happen? That's the other part of it. Any of the elements that you aspire for truly may or may not come to life. And I hope that they do. but at the same time, like hope only goes so far
Yeah.
for anything. So that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that I think that some of these concepts are as not clear cut as they may appear.
Oleg, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that people aspire to be villains?
Mm, I, I it's a difficult question to answer. I would say, hypothetically speaking, yeah, I would think so. And the only reason why I say that is because I think people aspire to be many things in this world. And so the only conclusion I can make from that is that if people aspire to be many things in this world, why can't an argument be made that one aspires to be a villain? I think that some people maybe aspire to be villains and they become villains. I think some people might become villains as a byproduct of the choices that they made in their lives. So it might have started as something that is not harmful, and then over time it evolved, and then it became something that did turn into whatever that thing it is. Like I was talking to a couple people this morning, and we were talking about our pasts, and one of the things that I found fascinating in these conversations is when we were talking about our past, and one of the things that I had to do as well as them was steal, like steal in order to survive.
Mm,
I remember taking
mhm,
change from my birth mom just so I can go buy bread
mhm,
and some of these other things.
mhm,
And then what I realized was that even after being adopted, those patterns and those behaviors continued.
mhm,
So like I would my one of my best friends could literally say this better than I could, but one of the times I was spending night at his house, I took a 20 from him, and then I blamed it as if it was his brother that took the 20.
mhm,
So in that case, I was very fortunate to be able to do that in his household, and with him knowing me relatively well and choosing to accept me as a friend and not literally befriend me or whatever it was afterwards. So in that case, yes, I had the best of intentions to start off, but then at the same time, those circumstances put me in very challenging situations where I still continued a pattern of stealing when A, I might not have had to do it, and B, that could have really impacted my friendship. It could have impacted my view because he could have shared that with whoever. And so from there, I might not have been able to make friends as easily because
mhm,
that's how it would have
mhm,
been perceived.
mhm,
So, longer answer to your question is, I think yes, some people could aspire to be villains, and then some people may also become villains due to the byproducts of their decisions, which may not start off with the most of
mhm,
evil intentions.
mhm. Melody sort of goes a little bit into that, although it's in a slightly different direction in her most recent remark.
Hmm.
And some don't realize it's a choice. I personally believe that that last sentence is critical.
Hmm.
When we don't realize there's a choice, whether it's due to just sheer ignorance or inability to see something, or a denial about the full range of options available to us, we end up then becoming villains because we feel
Hmm.
driven down paths that we feel we have to go down, when really we don't have to go down any kind of path.
Hmm. How do you understand what a choice is? I know this might be a silly question, but how do you know if the choice is available to you, so to speak?
I don't think it's a silly question at all. I think it's the deepest one. Maybe it's the most important one that we all as human beings face.
Hmm.
A choice, and it's a controversial one
Hmm.
because there is some brain science, and I don't want to say I'm an expert on this, but I have read enough to be aware of this, that our brains make decisions and our conscious minds rationalize those. And so according to those that posit that brain theory, we're not really making choices. We're rationalizing outputs that our brains are putting out there, and it merely appears to us to be a choice. So that is something that a lot of people, when they hear and I've talked to about it with them, they dismiss it out of hand. I think the dismissal out of hand actually is rooted in either resistance to new ideas or fear. Fear that we don't have control or free will as we believe we have. I actually do believe in free will. I don't necessarily accept that that theory is the entire story, but I will not dismiss actual science for which there's evidence completely. And I do believe in, when it comes to those sorts of things, accepting something whether I like it or not. It's that theory to me is not at a place from what I know that's worth fully accepting. So I'll just put that out there as a preface. But stepping back, assuming that we do have conscious choices, and there are specific reasons why I do believe that there are conscious choices irrespective of these things in our brain, is that to me a choice is any time you exercise agency, any time that you act in a way that is apart from instinct. For instance, automatic reactions. You put your hand on a flame and it jerks back. To me, that's not a choice because it's a nervous reflex. We can't, there's no conscious power that we have to avoid that. When the World Trade Center came down, I ran. That was purely instinct. I remember it very vividly. I don't think anyone looking at my own mental state, I could not have exercised a choice to sit there and look or run or cower or whatever. I was acting. I just was acting. I wasn't even a conscious being, really. And that's why I don't really judge those that just froze. I don't believe they had a choice there. However, leaving instinctive activations aside, I believe there always is a choice. You hear all the time people say, I have no choice. Someone I know, I think I mentioned in a few episodes, told me that, a relative of theirs punched them in the face in the street. And they're like, I can't abandon this relative. I love them. They're my relative. I have no choice. I have to have them in my life. Bullshit. You've got choice. Excuse my language. You've got choice. You've got choice. You just think you don't have a choice. Yeah. I am unhappy in my life. I am in a situation that I feel I can't get out of. I always have a choice. Suicide, as uncomfortable as it is for us to talk about, and I don't want to generalize about suicide, especially because sometimes people do it in mental states that aren't clear, but at least in some situations has historically represented a choice. In certain military situations or in ancient Rome, right? If you were a part of a royal family that was out of favor, you were given the choice of suicide or not. Slaves, again, often, not universally, but often had access to tools that could have enabled them to kill themselves. And some did. They had a choice. I'm not saying that slavery is justified and that those that were enslaved, by the way, I want to make clear because I don't want to be canceled about something I didn't even say 10 years down the road. I'm not saying that it's anyone's fault that they were slaves or that people who were slaves didn't have extremely constrained choices. They did have constrained choices and there were real limitations. And I in no way don't want anyone accusing me of minimizing the horrors of slavery because of someone who's part African American. I'm very aware of that. But be that as it may, it's uncomfortable for us to talk about about choice in extreme situations. But many times many more times we have the opportunity for agency, for acting against instinct than we may, or operating outside of instinct than we might acknowledge. What are your thoughts?
Well, I do agree with you as far as I do believe that there's always a choice. It may not be as evident as I would like it for it to be.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's always the possibility for a choice to exist. I think a choice comes from having options and being aware of the options, and that I also agree with you as far as being able to get out of whatever circumstances that one might be experiencing. I can only speak from my perspective, and that's the things that I've experienced to this point. I've always believed that there was a choice, even in the darkest of the darkest moments that I've been through. Now, that choice may not have led me to the ultimate solution, and
Hmm.
that's something that I've also had to realize and really accept, is that I think life is about life is a series of choices, and it's not necessarily that one choice is going to lead to the ultimate thing. I think if anything, one choice may lead to another choice and another choice and another choice and another choice. So I agree with you there. The thing that I find interesting when it comes to choices is I think that there also are multiple components at stake that play into being able to make the choice. I think it's one thing to recognize that you have a choice, but it's a whole other thing to actually be able to act upon that and
Hmm.
have the courage and confidence and all these other things that play into the ability to actually decide. I could sit here all day and I can fantasize about what I want to do as far as my future goes. But unless I choose to take action and involve other people as part of my journey, the chances of those things manifesting are going to be very, very slim.
Hmm.
So there I have to exercise the fact that yes, I can commit to the journey, but at the same time I might also have to pick up the phone and say, "Hey Scott, I need help. Can you help me in
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z area?" So I think there are multiple components that play into that role, and I know that you do a lot of this through your podcasts, and I do a lot of this through the Overcoming Odds podcast, and that's helping create spaces for people to make choices when it comes to
Yeah.
anything in life, and that's developing better relationships with other people, better relationship with themselves, better relationships with money, and all these other topics. But I also find it fascinating how, in just recognizing that yes, the choice is available, but there's also a journey, there's a process to making that single choice
Mm.
that oftentimes may not get the proper discussion that I think sometimes it might require.
I have a choice to
Hmm.
turn the conversation over to you right now to talk a little bit about what you're doing, why your life is as epic as it is, and what the
Hmm.
long game is for you, and where people can find out more about you.
For me, the big thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to travel in order to learn about other people and learn about the different cultures and different ways of thinking and living life. And one of the things that I've experienced to this point is having traveled through a handful of countries is I've been able to find my own sense of rhythm in a day to day. And I think for me, that was a huge realization in understanding that it's not always about more, more, more. It's not always about go, go, go. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with places like United States. I'm just saying that in living in US, I've found that challenging for me personally speaking. I found it challenging to always have this mindset of always have to be on the go. I always have to strive for more. I've started to in the recent years understand that there has to be more. There has to be other ways to experience this journey of life. So that's what I started to do, and that is the direction that I started to take, even with the Overcoming Odds, the podcast, and everything that we're doing, and the Saturday calls that we host called Courageous Conversations, where people can explore some of these larger topics and connect to a community of other people that are able to do it. So those are the things that I'm a part of. And I know outside of that, you also have a show of your own called
I
Purpose Highway
do.
that is very similar when it comes to themes and different things that we choose to explore. But that's really the beauty of it, is that I think I can say that I'm living in an epic life, not because I've started organization or host a podcast or a variety of other things, but it's because I've constantly chosen to put myself in positions where I'm challenging my own limitations. I'm challenging my own beliefs of what I thought I knew yesterday. Because at the end of the day, what I'm beginning to realize is the things that got me here may not get me there.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest realization that I've had to this point. And I'm sure that you might have encountered similar things through the stories that you've heard on your show.
Absolutely. Scott Mason's Purpose Highway is at purposehighway.com. It is a podcast that explores new ways for people to find connection to themselves and to others through the search for spirituality, ethical grounding, and purpose in a world where a silent revolution in thinking around meaning is occurring and a secret plague of alienation has been separating us from each other, dividing our culture. The stories in there are incredible about people who have new pathways and visions for how we can change and shift the stories and the narratives of our lives and begin to take steps towards living an epic experience, whatever that experience might be.
Do you think critical thinking is going to become one of the more valuable skills moving forward?
I think that that is questionable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for a certain segment of society, for the elite, yes.
Mm-hmm.
As to whether those who are not in a certain strata of society are going to need those skills or not, or have those skills desired or not, is very much open to question.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you ask, and what do you think?
I've just been curious, and as you were talking about your show and the things that I've been able to do through our organization, it's just something that I started to believe more and more. It's just that I think the ability to think through problems and acknowledge possible solutions and everything along those lines might become something that is almost a huge skill to develop and to learn from. So I don't know if it's going to become a pillar of society, so to speak, moving forward. But if anything, for me, it has played a tremendous role, huge role in having the ability to critically think through the events that I experience on a day-to-day basis.
I'll tell you this.
Mm-hmm.
Our planet is, in my opinion, in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And we need critical thinking and creative thinking as well if we're going to get out of the fixes that we are increasingly digging ourselves into.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether critical thinking as something that the masses are encouraged to do or choose to do
Mm-hmm.
is a different story. Maybe we should have a whole discussion about that sometime, although we might get censored. But anyone who's watched the movie Wall-E can very easily imagine a future in which, at least for the masses, critical thinking is not a direction that they're encouraged to move into.
Yeah. Speaking of thinking and speaking of brilliant design, where did you get that T-shirt?
Well, it doesn't look as good on me as it does on you. But I think that you're right. Some people that are living epic lives are all associated with our sponsor, Spectrum Designs Foundation. Their CEO, Patrick Bardsley, living an epic life. He founded this company in a garage, and now it has expanded and is doing incredible work for people that truly deserve the assistance in multiple cities. It is a t-shirt and apparel printing company. They also do embroidery of apparel and accessories. And if you would like to see a little bit more about them, perhaps you should watch some animation that we've got. Thank you for the compliment, by the way. I saw that in closing, Melody.
And I'm going to play this right here.
t-shirt. Yeah, sure.